his men finally have been attacked, and they come to an island of Circe. And as they're going up to this palace, they're just looking for comfort, they're looking for food, a place to relax and rest. They go up to this palace and they see beasts around them. They see animals growling, but they're not attacking them. It's kind of creepy. They're kind of weirded out. But they still go in, and they go into this home, this palace. And then there is this beautiful witch. And she offers them food. She offers them all the delicacies that they desire. And she gives them wine to rest. And in this wine is a potion. It's a poison. And what it does, it turns them into beasts. It turns them into animals. Now, in the classical tradition, throughout the ancients, the classical and the Christian classical tradition, the Christians have used this story to talk about what vice and virtue do. Vice, our sin, makes us more animal-like, makes us more beastly. And pursuing virtue, and if you particularly are saved by God's grace and you're going through progressive sanctification, becoming more like Christ, well, you're going to look more and more human, the perfect image of God, like Christ. And so I'm going to now read a little bit from Boethius. Boethius he's a statesman, he was a philosopher and a theologian, just at the end of late antiquity, right before the Middle Ages. So he uses this story, and we can see here an example of what we'll be doing in some of our great books classes. He uses this story to talk about human reality. So Boethius, just a little background, he was this theologian, right? However, he was now a counselor to the emperor, and this is an emperor who was once a barbarian. It's Theodoric the Great. And he was educated by the Romans. However, these Germanic tribes came into Europe, right? They're from Europe, and they're coming into Rome, and they're taking over. Well, in the 300s, basically the 300s or 400s, the Romans are fighting these barbarian tribes. And by the end of the 400s, they pretty much have taken over. And so now you have a barbarian, Theodoric, now in control of the empire. And he serves underneath him. Well, Theodoric thinks Boethius is conspiring with the Eastern Empire, with Constantinople. And he puts him in prison, and he sentences him to death. And so this is a great work, and it's him, Boethius, in prison. He's in prison, being sentenced to death, and he writes this beautiful dialogue between him and Lady Wisdom. Him and Lady Wisdom, and there's dialogue in here, there's philosophy, there's also poetry. It's a beautiful work. But I'm just going to read a portion here now, which is related to our talk, and I think it's going to then give us a good jumping off point to talk about our curriculum. So he writes, "Thus it happens that evil men cease to be what they had been, though the remaining appearance of the human body shows that these men had once been humans. And so, since they turned to evil, they've also lost their human nature. And since virtue alone is able to make a person surpass his fellow men, it must be the case that those whom wickedness brings down from their human state are sunk so low they don't deserve to be called human. Thus it happens that if you saw a man transformed by vices, you couldn't consider him human. Suppose a violent robber burns with desire for another man's riches. Well, you would say he's like a wolf. A wild and restless man who busies his tongue with lawsuits, you would compare him to a dog. A man who sneaks and lurks about, hoping to trip up others by deceit, he's just like a little fox. A man who can't control his rage seems to bear the spirit of a lion. A timid, frightened man who flees from things he shouldn't fear is like a deer. A sluggish, dull, lazy man lives the life of an ass. Suppose a fickle, inconstant man keeps changing his pursuits. Well, he's no different than a bird. A man who drowns in foul and impure lusts, he's held by the pleasures of a dirty sow. And so it happens that a man who abandons virtue, since he can't become godlike, turns into a beast." And then he gives this beautiful, the story of Odysseus' oarsmen going into Circe's palace. He talks about how they changed into animals, much more beautifully than I read it. But after he tells this story, this muse Lady Wisdom tells him this story about Odysseus. his men turning to beasts? Boethius says, "Then I replied, I agree, and I see that we can rightly say that corrupt men, though they keep the appearances of a human body, are turned into beasts through the state of their souls." So that is a great work that they are going to be reading. And that's part of the classical tradition, is integrating different works with different topics that we're going to be discussing. And they're usually transcendent ideas. What does it mean to be man? Who is our creator? How should we live? Now here we see that in the classical tradition, they talk about this being beasts and animals. We know that there's evidence that the image of God remains in humans, right? It says even after they fell, the image of God was still present. And he was made after the likeness of his Father. So we see the image of God is still there. We're not denigrating humanity here, but we are acknowledging the depravity and the fallenness and sinfulness of man, okay? We're not saying the image of God was totally destroyed within them. They still are God's image bearers. However, in the tradition, they now see this problem, the ancients, the pagans, and the Christians. We have sin, we have vice. Now, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? Well, the Christians have two commands, or two commissions. They have the creation mandate, right? The creation mandate, which is to go, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. All right, so subdue creation and exercise dominion over creation. Then later after the flood, the same thing is reiterated to Noah, except there's also added this idea of protecting human beings, all right? Capital punishment. So we know we're supposed to exercise dominion over creation, and in some way we're supposed to protect the sanctity of life. That's what all humans need to do. And as Christians, we then also have the Great Commission to go and spread the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, that sins can be forgiven and men can be changed. We can be sanctified and ultimately glorified if we receive the forgiveness of our sins through Jesus Christ. And so, in the tradition, we say, how do we do this? The pagans ultimately come to, well, through wisdom and virtue. And Christians, after receiving this tradition from the Greeks and the Romans, they say, yes, wisdom, virtue, and biblical affections as well. Wisdom, virtue, and affections. Now, how do we actually do that, though? How do you instill that in a child or a human being? And that's what the philosophers were trying to figure out. Well, if we look across this time span of the church, there's going to be slightly different answers, slightly different emphases, different tastes, different desires, and what they desire or want their education to look like. However, there's a common theme in all of them in the classical tradition, and that is the liberal arts and human formation. The liberal arts and enculturation. And so ultimately that comes down to us is the arts of word, the language arts, and the arts of number, the mathematical arts, and then a biblical enculturation, a biblical worldview in all that we do. And so that is what this whole curriculum, hopefully you have a sheet, is based off of. Our curriculum is designed after the liberal arts tradition handed down to us through our brothers and sisters in Christ throughout the history of the church. So then I want to talk, I've talked about what the liberal arts are before. You see them here, some summaries. I don't want to spend too much time on those. So I'm going to just single out a few of these, like I mentioned, and how they look in upper school, okay? So one question I was asked was, okay, what does science look like? And so science, we've been, in the lower school, right, we've been adding it to history. It's looking at the natural philosophers. As you go along throughout the history curriculum, what are the ideas they're thinking about with nature? And how do they explore nature? And we learn that along the way. It's kind of an enrichment to the history curriculum. But once we get to upper school in 7th grade, we look at, you'll see there, this might be kind of small for some of your eyes, is inquiry and wonder and local creation, okay? Inquiry and wonder and local creation. What we want to do is, starting out in 7th grade, is to have the children actually observe nature, okay? We're going to start off by learning basic drawing skills and sketching skills so that we can create nature journals. And so we're going to have a mini art class at the beginning of the year, and as it's still fall, they're going to go out and observe nature and sketch nature. And then in wintertime, when it gets colder, we plan to have them, yes, go out to the same spots so they can observe nature in a different season, but then also then also they're going to then learn more about geography and use maps while they're in the classroom. And so we want to be able to sketch out in our local area what impacts us. In Wisconsin, what impacts us? What is the wildlife? What is the local wildlife? What are the body of water around us? Right, we have the Great Lakes. We have different rivers, this Root River, the Milwaukee River. We have the Mississippi. And how do these things then impact Wisconsin? So again, this is under piety. Why is science under piety? Well, this is cultivating a sense of place and wonder in God's creation. Remember, piety is a correct understanding and right relationship with God, honoring God, your neighbor, your family, and his created order. And so here we're looking at God's created order and how do we fit in? And so we want to experience it, observe it, inquire, and experience the wonder and beauty of it. Then in 8th grade, we have inquiry and wonder in the U.S., the United States. So now that we have a little place of home, similar thing, but we want to go out wider. And we want to do this by kind of following the journey of Lewis and Clark. All right, how do we get from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific? Well, how does this impact U.S.? What is the geography? What are the landscapes? What are the animals we're going to come along as we're exploring west? How do we get from the Atlantic through the Erie Canal to Lake Erie, the Great Lakes, down to the rivers, even to the Ohio? And next thing you know, Lewis and Clark in Missouri, and they find a pathway to get to the Pacific. How do they do that? Well, we're going to follow their trail using their journals and study them as natural philosophers and see what they observed and learn about those animals as well. And so again, while we're doing that, that's in class and learning how to draw maps, that'll be in class. Then we'll be going outside as well. And again, practicing those drawing skills, practicing observing creation, and those nature journals as well. I think this would also be a neat opportunity for us to look at tracking, right? What do those men struggle with? They had to find animals to go hunt and eat. So tracking skills, walking through the woods and then drawing the tracks, looking for spore, right? Looking for that overturned leaf, that bruised reed, those kind of things. Just observing the beauty through this great adventure. And then we have inquiry and wonder in the classical astronomy. Again, this is just observation. These first 3 years are simply observation. We want them to experience nature. And so we'll learn about the phases of the moon. How do we know what part of the year we're in? Based upon constellations in the sky. Some of this is going to include them going home and observing things at night. So you guys will be involved in this astronomy. This will be more like observing nature and something like a farmer's almanac, right? How do they tell when the seasons will come in and when it might rain, and how do they think there's going to be more or less snowfall? So experiencing nature that way. It also, the classical constellations as well will be part of it. Then we move on to, it says chemistry, physics, and advanced biology. These right now are kind of planned for, we just have more of a typical science class here. However, what we want to do is develop more integration with the great books. And so as we see these, we want to use people like Newton, right? People who discovered nature, they were natural philosophers themselves. They integrated their observations of all of nature, and they wrote about them. We want those writings and those great works and poetry to be involved in these classes as well, not just a dry textbook. All right, then I'll move on to, start thinking of questions as I'm going along. Then going to the great books. I've had parents ask me, what are you guys going to be reading? What does it look like compared to what some of our older kids are reading? Because some of you guys are in Logos online. And on the back of your sheet, we have a reading list we've been working on. And this list, I'm happy with. There might still be some moving back and forth between grades, just to make sure that we're not piling on too much or making sure, oh, look, that literature selection is actually a little too big, we might shift it over. But I'm pretty happy with our selection here of being able to go through and maybe make slight adjustments in the future. But we want to have some great work. Some of these are selections, like the histories. Some of them are selections from the histories. Other parts are the literature. We really want to go deep and dive into the literature. We don't want to just take selections of those great works. We want to actually dive into those full things. So there's a list for you guys to look at and see what you think. We have a mix here of literature, philosophy, theology, history. And instead of having textbooks, we have a work that's not technically considered a great work, but it's Churchill's History of the English-Speaking People. And that is a good work. And he quotes a lot of the great works along his way. So we'll use that history almost like our side of textbook, providing context as we go through the great works there. And other ones that don't have Churchill, well, we're using the actual great works from those historians of the time period in order to provide context for these great works of literature. Again, think of questions if you have some. All right, then moving on to rhetoric. Rhetoric is a very important part of classical education. Excuse me. Now, what is rhetoric, right? We've talked about in the lower school how important grammar is, how important reading good books is to us thinking through things. Grace, you're looking at me like you know what I'm going to quote. Gracie, every morning in our class, does read what I'm about to read to you. So rhetoric is something that you might think of just persuasion, right? Just persuasion or influencing power over people. Well, it is influence, it's style, it is beauty. However, it's not meant, especially in the Christian rhetoric, it's not meant to just exercise your influence over people and sway them to your opinion. It's meant to pursue truth within community. All right, so the Romans, the end of their academic curriculum, or the prime goal they wanted to reach was to be the great rhetorician. All right, this is what Augustine was before he became a Christian, was to be a rhetorician. And Quintilian wrote a book, he was a great rhetorician, and he wrote a book on instructing how do you teach rhetoric to students. And this is what he says is the goal of a rhetorician. He says, my aim then is the education of the perfect orator. The first essential for such a one is that he should be a good man, the man who can really play his part as a citizen and is capable of meeting the demands both of public and private business. The man who can guide a state by his counsels, give it a firm basis by his legislation, and purge its vices by his decisions as a judge is assuredly no other than the orator of our quest. So, rhetoric is the capstone of the trivium. It's using grammar, logic, and persuasive speech in order to bring within a community a sense of harmony and bring them towards and guide them towards truth. It's not just what you think of when you think of sophistry or a politician who says, that's just rhetoric. No. A Christian definition of rhetoric, we would say, is the art of decision-making in community. It trains us to think, to organize our thoughts, to judge rightly, to make decisions, and to communicate with others. No mere subject. It is the capstone of the arts of a free people. This is why it was so important to the Romans. The Romans, of course, they had people going into law to try to make policies in their courts, right, in their republic. We're not necessarily training lawyers here, though you will see within our writing and rhetoric program that they are going to be debating laws. They're going to be doing that. However, we want to make it a sense of decision-making and community, guiding them toward the truth, not just influence and power and persuasion. All right? And so those are the three that I was asked about from different parents. And I think rhetoric then leads to another thing I'm excited about. So I'm going to get to the more practical and logistical aspects of what upper school looked like now. Part of this rhetoric curriculum, you look there, and you see these different words. They're a different language. And you're saying, what in the world is encomium, vituperation? What is that? All right? So if I could just briefly say, this is called the program, or the progymnasmata, okay? And this is the backbone of a lot of classical education, where you think of the art of logic and rhetoric. So we start off with fable, and there you see fable there. That's already starting in 4th grade. And fables is a short story with a moral. And then narratives start asking who, what, where, why, and how. And these weird kriya and proverb, well, a proverb is a wise saying, a short saying, or a clever insight into human behavior. A kriya is a short essay or remembrance that praises the author of a saying or some doer of a great action. So it's praising them. We move on through rhetoric here. to confirmation and refutation, right? Confirmation is a short essay defending certain parts of a narrative that's believable, probable, clear, and refutation is the opposite of that's not believable or probable. And you can see why the ancient Romans or Greeks would use that. They had questions about these myths of theirs. These were their gods. Many of them worshiped them. Is it probable that Zeus committed adultery with a human? I thought the gods were just. Where do we get justice from? How is justice true? Well, no. That either isn't true, that must be a false tale from some crazy poet, right? Some crazy storyteller. Well, then they'll debate it. They say, no, he could do that. Maybe there's a power higher than him that creates justice. And so you can see already how they're starting to think critically here. Commonplace. This is a persuasive essay that attacks or defends certain aspects, not of the gods or stories, but of human nature itself. Encomium and vituperation. So encomium is an expository composition. It's praising the values of a specific person, so praises, or it's attacking their vices. So learn how to attack their vices of a person. Vituperation is an expository composition condemning people. So learn how do you condemn someone respectfully in a way that behavior was worthy of a condemnation. How do you do so in a way that's convincing? All right, comparison. The virtues of someone and the vices of another. You compare two people. Or just a comparison of degree and kind. This is something like Plutarch's Lives, right? He has two different great heroes, and he discusses both of them. How do they compare with one another? Then we go to description and impersonation. And in this description is simply using the five senses. How can I write a paper convincing people of something using their five senses? And impersonation is then pretending to be a figure from history, learning about that figure, how they write, and then writing an essay as if you were that person, okay? And then thesis is the last that you might think of the classic five-paragraph persuasive essay. That would be that first thesis there. And through all of these, we still got mock trial. So mock trial and defending a law. That's where you pick up a particular law, you learn both sides of it, you defend it, you argue against it, and then you find a side and you debate with one another on that law. Okay, now for each of these, what they're doing is they're using a great work, they're learning from a great author, they're impersonating that great author, they're narrating back their exact words, and then they're learning how to use the author's style and write on their own. And so they're using these, they're learning from them, and then they're learning a tool, and they're using that tool to write in their style, their form of writing, all the way through all of these. Now, that gets us to ninth grade. Ninth grade, the persuasive essay, and that's the end of the classical program. All right? Now, we still have more rhetoric to go, though. We got 3 years. All right, this is where, for me, it gets particularly exciting. This is here in grade 10, it says interpreting the cosmos. All right, they're going to be engaging with worldview. The year before, they got their thesis down. They know how a thesis should work. Now they're going to be reading literature, reading works, and how then can we view the world through a biblical worldview? They're going to look through, read through something like The Universe Next Door. And this is a book where you look at different worldviews. So let's say you're going to evaluate Christian theism. You're going to evaluate, therapeutic deism, Eastern pantheistic monism, so like oneness, or a polytheism, when you believe in multiple gods, and then atheism. You look at each of these belief structures, and you look at them and you see, what are their presuppositions? What do they believe is reality? How do they come to a knowledge of that reality? And then what are the implications? How do they think you should live? And after that, well, does it even matter? What do they believe about the end of things? So you look at each of these religions or worldviews, and you see then the presuppositions that philosophically you're looking at them. And then we'll look through art history as well and see what influences have impacted them throughout history of the art, poetry, and then the history and presuppositions of science, which may not be what they seem to be. So that'll be a year of intensive reading. That will be something that'll be preparing them then for the next year for beginning their first thesis, all right? So in 11th grade, they will be using Aristotle's Rhetoric, a book that he wrote, and basing a thesis off of that. I believe it's about a 13-page paper. A 13-page paper of a thesis that they're going to come up with, and this will be an academic thesis. And as they do this, they're going to have to be reading different works that we give them, and they're going to be coming up with something academic to write. And this will be more than enough for them as they enter into college, already in junior year, more than any college is going to expect them to start off with. So if that is their desire to go off to college, boom, right here, you already have enough. And then while they do this, though, they're going to start looking for their senior thesis, start looking for ideas. What do I want to write about in my senior year? And also trying to find a tutor. This is what I'm talking about with the tutor system. Who's someone in our church, from our church, whether it's your local church or ours, who's someone that really has an interest or a love for something, and I do as well. And they're going to then help you, come alongside you and help you start planning for a thesis. So here it might be preparing to write. It could be academic as well. You could already use your research from your junior year, but senior year, we want them to be able to find something that really interests them and work on it with someone that they love. And a tutor is going to come alongside them almost as a mentor and help them, give them works that they need. So this is based off of Oxford's tutorial system. In Oxford's tutorial system, typically, it's a small class, a group of 1 to 3 students, and they meet with a tutor or mentor weekly or monthly, depending on the class. They're assigned reading and a few questions, which then they come prepared to discuss and defend their answers with. So then the tutors help the students see where they're right, where they fall short, and they provide further resources and research in order to complete research to complete and to gain a deeper understanding of the topic that they're given to discuss at those meetings. Well, at Imago Day, it'll be similar to that. We want them in 10th grade. That class with interpreting the cosmos is going to be like that, but with a normal-sized classroom, but getting ready for it, preparing to be discussing questions in that way. And then meeting in 11th grade, they will be meeting with someone who, let's say you're interested in, you're going to start meeting with them in 11th grade, and then by 12th grade, by the beginning of the year, we really want them to have their tutor picked out. And let's say you're interested in the trades, all right? We want this to be an opportunity for, maybe it's at the end of the day, this is an opportunity for someone to be mentored or someone who's in the trades. And they get to work with their hands for a couple months and then write their paper using all the experience they have in the class education. Perhaps their paper is something on the way that hard work shapes a man, right? And their paper will then be integrating academic work with a trade or a skill that they've now have some experience with. It could be so that would be like a common arts paper. It could be a fine art paper. Let's say outside of school they take ballet or they use an instrument. Well, they could use those teachers as well to help them integrate maybe the history of ballet and talk about beauty and that kind of thing. It could be something would be neat if you want to go more a natural history route or a natural philosophy route. You could be talking about the history of deer in Wisconsin. And part of your paper, this would be a 13 to 16-page paper, is going to be going out and nature journaling on some deer trails, right? And you get to look at their spoor, and then you also look and research the history of white-tailed deer. You get to observe it in different seasons, especially if you're prepared by junior year, of what that nature looks like. And then you get to you add those things into your paper, and then you get to write about them. Maybe you're including poetry there. And so it's a mix of a nature journal, a large nature journal, incorporated into a senior thesis. So I know some of us have seen those awesome speeches that they give at ACCS at the conference at the end of each year, and they're magnificent. That would be something like what we're doing in 11th grade. Those speeches would be something like that. And then if you want to continue on with more of an academic speech in 12th grade, you're free to do so, and you can compete in the ACCS's conference. However, it's also allowing, look, you've had all these years, we've told you what a classical education looks like, now you have a chance to prepare for after the school as well. So that's the tutorial, and that's an opportunity for members of the church, parents, those to come alongside either their children or other children in the school and help share your love for them and have some accountability there. So mentor some of the children. All right. Then, let's see, I'll just try to touch only 2 more of these. So that's the tutorial system. Another system that we'll have is the house system. And this, the only way I know how to explain it is by saying it's like Harry Potter. Right, you have your house, you belong to that house, you do things with the members of that house, and you cultivate a mini culture within the culture of your school. So here we'll have 4 houses, and it will be Itos, Tauros, Leon, and Anthropos. So Itos is their mascot's the eagle, Tauros the bull, Leon the lion, and Anthropos the man. And these seem to be based off of, this is like a medieval tradition, but it seems to be based off of the visions of, I believe it's Ezekiel. He looks up and he sees something, he sees something like a lion, something like an eagle, like a man. And then later on in Revelation, there's another vision like that, right? Or he sees something else and he describes a similar thing. Well, in the Middle Ages, they then use these and they assigned one of the animals, one of these things they saw, to a gospel. And so each house will have a mascot and an assigned gospel that'll be theirs. And they'll each have their own banners that they'll be fighting under. They'll be having competitions, and they'll be gaining points throughout the year. So at the end, they can win a house cup. So it'll be academic competition, art competition, and a physical competition. And then throughout the year as well, this also brings up a merit and demerit system. With the way we grade, right, we don't have these numbers that we're assigning the students in the ways that we're giving them these GPAs that they're now fighting for. Well, we still need some accountability, and it's this merit system. Typically, it'll be for virtues. If we see a student practicing a virtue, a teacher can assign them a blue little sheet of paper and tell them, hey, that was a really good job in there. Sign it and date it. And then if they are missing their homework, if they're seeming to pursue vice in their life at school, they're not loving their neighbor, they will receive a demerit. And the teacher who assigns it will sign it and say why. And at the end of the week, the houses will get together, maybe the week or bi-weekly, they'll get together, and they're going to count up their merits and demerits, and there'll be a system of accountability within the house. And so when you are failing to accomplish your work, if you're pursuing vice rather than virtue, it's on you. You hurt your house, but it also hurts the people around you as well. And so we can see how sin works. It doesn't only impact our individual selves, it impacts those around us as well. And so this is the merit and demerit system that'll be part of the house system. What it'll look like is once they get a little older, at 7th grade, we'll assign them their house. Well, as they get older then, we'll assign house leaders, and they're chosen by teachers, the faculty, and myself. And then if we have parents who want to volunteer as house mentors, once they start gathering and meeting together, we'll want a house mentor with each house, and they can then help them organize their meetings. And they'll be making decisions like, they'll be assigned meetings like this, and one house will be participating in the open house night or the vision night, and they'll be the ones holding the doors for people. Or 1 month, they're going to be the ones who are doing the cleanup. 1 month, they'll be the ones who are helping the younger new students get into their classrooms. So that'll be a way to build community as well within the school. All right, and then very practically, I've had questions, how's this even going to work? Well, we do intend to have just a similar classroom where they have most of their classes in one classroom. Things like music, PE, obviously, and if we have the lab or art class in the future, and music, did I say music? Yeah. Those will be in their own, but most of the classes will be in one classroom, and the upper school teachers will then go to the classroom to teach. And we have, Lord willing, we'll have some space for the teachers to have an area where they're able to meet and have their own desks, areas where they can keep their papers, grade, talk, and study as they're preparing for classes. But they will be going to that classroom there as well. And right now, well, our plan is, Lord willing, that it'll stay the same. Up to 15 students per class, 2 classes all the way through. We want to keep it small. So we're talking about this Oxford tutorial, which is supposed to be small classes. We want to do it, but really these kids are getting a lot of that tutorship and mentorship already with the small class sizes that we'll have in the upper school as well. So those are the main things I was asked about and want to talk about for upper school. Do we have any questions here? Yes. Wait. No. We got to try this bad boy out. Can you catch it for her? Clark, you ready?
Thank you. Is this a microphone?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my question is regarding the more advanced, for instance, like mathematics. So like I saw like pre-calculus and calculus, and there's going to be like advanced science things, astronomy at like the really upper level, like junior or senior type of thing. How will you find teachers to teach those advanced subjects?
We got to pray. Pray and give them, hopefully we'll have someone who has years in advance of preparing for it. Yeah. And Lord willing, by then we'll be able to have some stability where we'll also be able to recruit through good payment as well. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the only answer I got for you right now.
Thank you. That's good enough.
So sorry. Any more questions? We got this awesome cube. Aren't you guys like, well, where do fine arts fit in here? They're under music here. Well, I want to talk about fine arts then if you don't have any questions. We have here, what we're looking for is to be very, very amateurish. Yes, amateurish, all right? Not professional. An amateur is someone, you might hear amo, amas, amat, amamos, matas, amant, someone who loves the thing they do. In order to build a culture, it must be a culture of participation. If you have one rock star on a stage and a bunch of people sitting there like drones just praising their talent, but they can't participate in it, that's not a true culture. That's performance and that's showmanship. A culture is them participating. That's why with our music program, it's not, we don't want to have a big mega church with flashing lights and a performer who's singing different notes that you can't even sing, right? Because it's congregational worship. Well, it's similar here. That's why we're doing folk dancing. We're learning how to dance together in community. And same here at performances. We want them to love it. We want them to engage in, at these last 3 years, they're all going to put on school performances. And so in our school, we're going to try to cultivate a lot of amateurs, all right? Including in gymnastics and marksmanship and mixed martial arts, people who love what they do. And so there's no escaping this. We don't have dumb jocks, we don't have nerds, and we don't have the recluse, artsy people who get to be by themselves. You have to be all of those things in this school, all right? That's what we're setting for the curriculum. Those things are all part of being a human. You can't escape them. You all have to be a part of them, join them, all right? So thank you for asking that question about the fine arts. Yes? Wait, sorry. You got to do it for the video we got some parents right here. Can you throw it all the way back there? You got that bear's arm there?
All right. How do you counteract the fairly robust evolutionary scholarship when it comes to the natural sciences?
Yeah, we'll use curriculum that are from a Christian worldview, and we also teach them the opposing worldview and where it falls short. So something like that, like interpreting the cosmos there, we'll read in the great books, we are going to have parts where we read part of Darwin's theory, right? And then in this class, we're going to look at the presuppositions to see where they fall short. So these, we want to expose them to unbelieving ideas as well. And yes, they'll be exposed to, let's say, Christian theism, theistic evolution, right? They're going to have these ideas, but then they'll have the knowledge of, then how do they counteract them? How do they use Scripture then to go back and counteract some of these ideas? So that'll be a part of it. They'll be exposed to these things for sure.
Is there any plan for like specific vocational training type classes in high school?
No. So the way that they might be able to participate that is in that senior thesis, where then they could actually leave school early to go and be mentored under someone. That's what, because we do, we'll call that the common arts. What we're trying to do is give them the tools of learning, the liberal arts, right? The mathematical arts and the language arts with cultivation of biblical wisdom and virtue and affections, so that whenever they leave the school, they'll be more than ready to engage in a trade or to go off and be mentored by someone, be apprenticed, if that makes sense. It's much better to have a virtuous student who can show up on time, has a good head on their shoulders, and knows the art of word and number, than someone who's only had a vocational training in one area. when they graduate. And again, we would say these are the things that make us uniquely human. Engaging in the art of word and art of number, and then cultivating our loves. That's what we emphasize in the classical curriculum.
I have now. My turn. About the tutorial system. So they're starting their thesis, or training in the thesis, in 8th grade. And so this is just like building blocks to get them to the point of complete independence for their thesis?
Yeah, so in 8th grade, that's the beginning of their first persuasive essay, and it's only a 5-paragraph essay, I believe. So that is just getting them to see the structure of having an intro, having your exordium, and then having them know your point of view, the opposite point of view, doing the body of it, and the conclusion. And so that's just knowing the structure of it. And then after we finish the thesis, then they're able to use law to attack. But that would not qualify as a truly robust, where they can go up and give a speech to people. So yeah, it is using the building blocks to slowly get them to a place where they can comfortably write and speak on any topic. If they're able to, now they have these tools, they can research and speak on them proficiently. I don't know if that answered particularly, though.
Yeah, that's good. But then at the end of this all, does this have oversight from the humanities teacher, or is it completely independent?
Depends on our humanities teacher. Depends who we get. There's someone who really loves rhetoric, and they're able to teach a couple writing classes at the end, or are we able to have a humanities teacher who can teach that as well? The more integration we have, the better, is what I think, particularly humanities and writing, because they're going to be doing with so much of those humane ideas. But as far as the tutor goes, it could be anybody. And they're going to be performing, so they'll be presenting this to the school board and myself, and presenting it to us orally. And then there'll be a sense afterward, we'll debate them a little. What's the reasoning behind this? You said this. It doesn't seem to follow from your previous argument. Can you clarify that? And so that'll be also part of it as well. But the tutor, there'll still be a teacher there. The tutor will be someone who they can go alongside, but they'll have to check in with either the rhetoric teacher or the humanities teacher. Yeah.
Would the gymnastics be actual gymnastics or just more advanced PE?
Actual gymnastics, but classical gymnastics. Sorry to ruin it for you. Gymnastics it's physical movement, and so we consider that part of dance even. But no, it'll be, so for the ladies, it'll be more CrossFit and MoveNat, and then some self-defense instruction. For the gentlemen, it's going to be CrossFit and MoveNat as well. So full body, high intensity training, but then more of an emphasis then for the grappling and the striking. So that just part of the classical curriculum of learning a martial art. You can defend your family and serve your people. So, I don't know, maybe someone will teach you back handsprings. It won't be me, though. Anyone else? Yeah? Let's go to Clark. Wait, you need the box.
In 7th grade, if their houses are going to start then, how small is it going to be?
Good question. Depends how many we have. Whatever number we have, divided by 4. All right, right here to Mrs. Yonke.
I'll build on that question. As you add the more grades up, do those grades get integrated into the current houses so it's a multi-grade house, or do they stay within the class itself?
So multi-grade house. So you'll have 7th grade to seniors, to 12th grade. And so once we get more 11th and 12th graders, those will be more of the house leaders once we actually get up there. What's going to be unique here is we'll have the chance for house mentors to be training some of these young men and women to become house leaders. But once we get there, they'll then be the ones kind of running the meeting and learning, not like, I don't know, the only experience I had was student council in public school. But something where they'll be gathering together, and have you ever heard of Robert's Rules of Order? They'll be trying to practice a meeting orderly and kind of like just an official meeting together, whereas they make plans for different events and are assigned different things. And those older ones will then kind of mentor the next few house leaders kind of coming up. Yeah.
Under music for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, where it says school performances,
Yes.
does that include like school plays and things like that that they'd be performing for everybody to see?
Yes, yeah. And so there it'll be opportunity for the common arts. So maybe this it can integrate the trades is what I hope is, you have stage crew, right? People need to be creating backdrops, and that'll be part of using saws. It'll be part of, but also the fine arts as well, of someone coming along and helping them paint some scenery for those. So incorporating the fine arts, the common arts, and then performing a play. No? You look like you're thinking.
Without the traditional GPA, if after 12th grade one of the children wants to attend a more class, like a college, how does our grading system, so you need that, right, to get in, like a grade or something, or GPA.
Right.
How does our grading system speak to like what a more traditional college would be looking for?
Right. Two parts to it. One is when I decided I wanted to do this type of assessment or grading with a different headmaster up in Green Bay. He's been wanting to do this for years, and he couldn't get parents off of worrying about that situation. But he said that whenever they receive people, because they started moving that way, whenever they receive people, students or admissions counselors who called them up to see what do these classes even mean, how do they correlate, as long as the headmaster stood up for the student and they saw what the actual work looked like and they were able to send a type of transcript, they were fine. However, what I plan to do then is we're going to increase, in the upper school, increase our gradient, adding another letter on there. I'm already testing it on some of our upper schoolers here, of having 4 grades instead of 3. That'll help me behind the scenes. So this is something we need to talk about in another session of the philosophy of assessment and grading. But we want the children to experience it as a mentor relationship, right? A mentor and an apprentice. If you're mentoring under someone, they don't say, well, you got that 97% correct. No, you actually did or you didn't polish that correctly. You did or you didn't screw that in right. Maybe it was a little off, but here's a way to fix it. So it's more of that apprentice-mentor mentality. But using a system like this, we want them to experience it that way. As administratively, we'll create a system behind it and try to give them percentages or average out some type of grade point average for them, if that makes sense. So whenever they receive a class in humanities, let's say, like you see this reading list here? Some of these there'll be philosophy credit, history credit, and literature credit, right? Well, to them, it was very harmonized. They learned about this period. They engaged the great works, and they were under a mentor relationship. Administratively, all the ugly stuff behind the scenes, those get sorted out into history credit, philosophy credit, literature credit. And then those we'll have to find a way for our grading system to correlate with certain things. Now, it's just like in homeschooling, where you create a transcript and you send it off to the college. It's not an exact science. So we won't have this whole scale of 93, 94, 95%, but we'll put in 100%, 80%, right, all the way down. Is that kind of answer? Yeah, one thing is we don't want to play their game because then we have to play by their rules. But there's also the practical aspect of, well, what if they do want to get in that kind of college? And so try to keep that influence out of the child's mind, allow them to engage in a pre-modern education before they had these things, right? What was George Washington's GPA? Don't know, doesn't matter, right? Those kind of things. So now, behind the scenes, we'll try to take care of them in that way, but we don't want them to have to grow up in that modern mindset of treating them like a computer. Yeah. All right, I will call this the last question unless there's a follow-up from this one.
Okay, so I'm jumping off what he said. Will we do ACT or SAT testing senior year?
Good question. No. It would be on you to do that. You're always free to do that. We will have something called the CLT, which is the classical learning test. You might have heard recently, Florida's now allowed all public universities to accept the CLT. And so we don't want to do any teaching to the test here just because. We don't need to give them a government test, which no longer is measuring what it was invented to measure in the past. So the classical learning test, you can go and look at an example of what they do. It still, unfortunately, is some multiple choice and things like that, but it's actually using great works that, you'd actually want to read these things and then have to answer questions according to them. So the children are actually being benefited, and it's in line with our curriculum. So it's going to be, and then they use the different types of questions they have to fulfill the same type of reasoning skills, quantitative and qualitative reasoning skills that the ACT and SAT do. So there'll be an option for that, but those two, we won't spend our time teaching for it or wasting, important time to take those tests. Is it off of that? 30 seconds, yep. And then we got refreshments in the back, so.
Obviously, in lower school, we've tried to completely stay away from computers, screens, tablets,
Yep.
using that for learning as a learning tool of any kind. When they get into upper school, begin to have to do research, write papers, essays, things like that. What place will computers hold in either researching or writing and things like that?
Right. Not a very high priority. We'll use a little bit of it, maybe especially the last 2 years of typing up those long papers. But it'll be using our library and these works that we're going to be writing about. The works in our rhetoric program and these works that they'll be engaging with. And there is in some of the, I was looking through the last couple of years of rhetoric, they'll have some sites you can go on, but it would be outside research and something that parents have control and supervision in their home over their child for. A lot of handwriting. All right, let's call that a night now for questions. Thank you all for coming. We do have some refreshments in the back, so feel free to grab some. And then you can ask me questions that you might have around, all right? Let me end in prayer, and then we'll head out for the evening. Lord, we thank you for this evening that you've given us. I pray that what we were able to talk about here was fruitful. Help us to think about these things as we go home and come up with good questions and see how they might impact our children. Lord, I pray that you use this evening to bless us and impact the culture of our school, of our families, and of our churches. May everyone make it home safe tonight and enjoy their weekend and gather with their local body, praising you, offering you the praises that you deserve, Lord. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Thank you all for coming tonight. Have a good night.
Bye.